Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at modern Hollywood cinema, more specifically Far From Heaven. We will be looking at key aspects of how films are often remade, repositioned, reimagined from Hollywood's past, how Hollywood uses films from the past and uses them as echoes for present day productions. I would also consider some theoretical ideas such as postmodernism, etc. Before we do that, just look at this scene from the film, Far From Heaven. Look at the colours, look at the way people are positioned, look at the camera shot, and also look at the mise-en-scène. Try to write down any key ideas you can think of that might have some effect as to why Todd Haynes decided to do what he did in this shot. When we're looking at modern day films, often we are talking about what we might call pastiche. What we mean by this, as Richard Dyer quite clearly says here, a text that shows extremely close similarities with another earlier text, but with clear discrepancies and distortions. Discrepancy, things like anachronisms, interruptions of other styles, a self-conscious or self-reflective moment. So it's quite clearly it's meant to echo the older film, but also bring you up to date as well. Or distortions. Pastiche selects, accentuates, exaggerates and or concentrates on some details. So for example, colour, camera angle, that type of thing. The meaning lies in these discrepancies and distortions. Well, why do it? Well, it can be interpreted simply as a superficial parody, but what's the point in doing that? Well, Dyer says pastiche of things like noir is able to recognise and mobilise a structure of feeling it perceives to have been caught by classical noir. We're going to be looking at film noir later on in the year, and the key thing here is that when we look at classic noir, essentially films made in a certain style between 1940 to about 1958, they have a certain look, a certain feel, quite often very downbeat, certain use of lighting, certain use of camera angles. What modern noir or neo-noir tries to do is pick up on these and use them in modern day films, which it highlights not only the modern day, but also, as it says here, that gives you a feeling of what was caught by that moment of classical noir in the 40s and 50s. A pastiche cites an original by citing its representations. Far From Heaven portrays Hollywood's images of domesticity, not actual domesticity, but the images of domesticity, not real 1950s middle-class suburban family life. And it plays on the audience's memories of and feelings about previous representations of the same time and place. So what are the similarities between those images and Far From Heaven? More specifically, Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. Well, what are those similarities? Well, clearly the setting, 1950s, America, in the northeast, New England. The setting, middle class. Decor is very, very similar, mid-century modern. The costumes, bourgeois on the one side, and the work clothes of the gardener on the other. Clearly colour, lighting, the use of the two shots, even performance style, the overt symbols of the mirrors and the windows, that type of thing. What are the discrepancies? Clearly homosexuality and interracial desire are two major things there. The cutting ratio, the amount of edits we see, and also the dialogue style. Be useful for you to look at those, especially those last two, and make notes of your own. What are the distortions here? Clearly, there is a stronger emphasis on gender in this, of class and of sexuality and race in social hierarchies. It's taking all the issues that we quite often were brought to the fore in America in the 1950s, or were beginning to be brought to the fore, but quite often in many ways hidden and coded in Hollywood films of that time, and making them much more overt. Pastiche comments, remember, on and replicates the original. When we look at the films of the 1950s, as I said, the key one is the woman's picture, the woman's films, and we talked a little bit about Douglas Sirk. Well, what does Far From Heaven do? Well, it also not only looks at the key films there we can see on there. All That Heaven Allows is a clear one to do with age and class, Written on the Wind, sexual problems, and imitation of life to do with race, but also brings in things like Max Ophuls' great films of The Reckless Moment, 1949. Key thing there is class. And also, we'll be looking at this person more next year, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who was a German, part of the German New Wave cinema or New German cinema of the 1970s. He was quite prolific and was very influenced by Sirk. Interestingly, remember, Sirk worked in Germany in the 1930s, went to make films in Hollywood in the 1950s. In a sense, Fassbinder takes those films and brings them back to West Germany. Ali, Fear Eats the Soul is completely a remake of Sirk's All That Heaven Allows. What are the similarities? Well, we've got a list there. Some of the key ones we've mentioned there. I'd like to think about you to think about things like lighting as well, the whole thing about Hollywood glamour, and also maybe if you can, maybe look at a trailer for Todd Haynes' new film, which is Carol, which is also set in the 1950s, again dealing with similar sorts of issues, homosexuality, this time from a female perspective. But look at the difference in the way he uses things like colour, and think about why that might be. There are completely overt symbols there. We can see things like the scarf, the flowering witch hazel, the mirrors we mentioned before, the camera work, and the performance style, that sort of theatrical, unrealistic feel to it. That is partly down to the Hollywood style, but also to some extent because, remember, as I said to you before, Douglas Sirk worked in Germany in theatre mainly, and there was a tradition of that Brechtian style, which is to make you feel that you are watching a play rather than anything realistic. The pastiche can move us even while allowing us to be conscious of where the means of our being moved come from. It's historicity. In other words, even though it's quite clearly referencing All That Heaven Allows, we can still be moved, and that's an interesting point. That why is it we are both intellectually involved but also emotionally involved? Far From Heaven tells a story about the 1950s and the emotional artificial style of the 50s melodrama, but about topics that were not possible then. It reminds us how much movies have changed and how the old styles still have power, allows us to enter the world of the past, and shows us the feeling is shaped by culture. There's a series of shots here which are very, very important, and we'll be discussing them more in the lesson. But it's important just to look at the use of colour. This should be quite well lit, but the cool colours are predominant here, the blues and the greys. Again, think why that might be. Here we have a Christmas setting, and the colours that are being pulled out are obviously here the greens and the reds. Obviously it's Christmas time and we want to get the feeling that this is a key moment in the calendar, but also a key moment in the story. But also there are other issues to do with those colours, as we'll see later. Here we see the whites and the light blues. Again, why might that be? Thinking about the whites and the blacks, we can see here two very clearly contrasting types of colour. And here this is very, very interesting. Think about the fact that the gardener is a man of nature. His clothes mirror the colours around him, of the trees. The woman there is on the left hand side. She's got the cool colours of domesticity, although there is a hint of the green which is mirroring his shirt. Think about why that might be, and the fact that she's holding a leaf, a branch as well. Look at the colours here. Greens we normally associate as important to do with nature, but these are artificial greens, hence the leopard print on the woman on the left hand side. Use of colour is analogous to a musical score. It has motifs and emotional cues to do with costume, set and decor, lighting, gels and features. The character and spatial coding to do with bars and raiment are important here, and as we said before, and as we're going to look at again, there are contrasts between warm colours such as your reds, oranges and yellows, and the cool colours, lavenders, blues and greens. Hopefully that was something you picked up on when you looked at the first image we had. Here we have a colour scene. Think about why people have been dressed in this, and make some notes on that. And again, look at that. Look at what's between the people. Look at the blue on the bottom, right at the flowers that are blue, and her shirt. Look at the flowers around the gardener and also in between them. You can see the oranges here, quite often orange, as it says at the top there, Cathy's desire for Raymond. Okay, the oranges come through at that point. Again, you can see it here, but it stands out much more in the domestic setting of her house. Reds and greens become the spaces of forbidden desire. Blues become moonlight, but also cues for a dying marriage. Notice her blues on her the clothes that she wears. And also the lighting, which is quite clearly classic Hollywood. Top lights, backlights and arc lights. The scarf becomes symbolic. Think about why that might be. The use of mirrors. What was the point of the mirrors in the Cirque film? Why are the mirrors being used here? We can see the use of cinematography, the two shots, the group shots, high and low angles, and the canted frames. Make notes about these and as to why they are being used in this film. As I said to you before, Far From Heaven, despite it being a pastiche, still has an effect. It produces powerful emotional responses. Think about why that is. It shows it has more of the artificial styles of the past, but which can still move us just as they moved their audiences then. Thus, realism or verisimilitude in movies is not necessarily for effective engagement. In other words, by having something completely realistic, it doesn't necessarily automatically engage us. Something that is artificial can still do that, using things like the colour score, the musical score, symbolism, enhance emotion despite the over-the-top constructiveness of it. When we look at genre, this is quite clearly the case here. Melodramas are meant to be over the top. They portray society's regulation of desire and its results on characters' lives. The artificialness of things like the visual code, echoes of fakeness, hypocrisies of middle-class suburban values. The emotional power reinforces a sympathy for characters as victims of oppression. And the hierarchies of oppression between man and woman, straight and gay, white and black, parent and child, is quite clearly symbolised here in this film. This is what Fassbinder said of Imitation of Life. The cruelty is that we can understand them both. Both are right and no one will be able to help them unless we can change the world. At this point, all of us in the cinema cried because changing the world is so difficult. And that's partly a key thing to do with Fassbinder. He makes his films, quite often they are tragic, things don't get worked out at the end. It is up to us to change the world, to make it a right and proper ending. Look at these questions and think about your answers to them.